Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have perhaps one of the favorite people to speak with, but she's never wanted to do these, so I'm really happy that she's came on. Rachel Newman, how are you doing?
Hi, I know you finally got me in front of a camera after, 2 years of trying?
Yeah, 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 two
Pretty
years.
much, yeah.
And the thing is, because we've also worked together, we always have these really in depth, really good conversations, but they're never recorded.
Probably for a good reason, but yeah, absolutely. We definitely should have recorded a few of our conversations.
But I'm actually really looking forward for this one because we're kind of talking about the strong act and legitimizing our profession. And I think at first I was kind of like, oh, that's a really good thing, but it's US based and I don't know how I can be involved in it. Until again, you kind of sat me down and you made it made sense to me as to why I also need to care about this. And again, I think that's something I really like about you and Tom is I can be quite hard headed if I don't understand something. And you both have do a really good job of sitting me down and listen, you idiot, this is what's happening. And this is why you should care. But yeah, no, if before we get into all the strong act and why we need to pay more attention to this, if you give a little background on how you got into strength and conditioning and what you're currently doing and what your mission is with pushing the strong act as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell the story of the moment kind of the iron bug bit me. It was during an internship actually at Yale with that staff and everything. At the time, I was a student at Penn State. I was getting my kinesiology degree, and I was really hard set on going into research, just in general physiology. But I did that internship. I was super, super excited for it. And as with many strength and conditioning coaches, fell in love with the weight room, and I kind of fell in love with that process and how almost every single day is an experiment. You know, you and I have talked about where the weight room is one of the coolest labs that you can be in, and you also get to skip all the boring parts of writing up your research and everything sometimes. So got my start there, stayed there for a few years as an assistant strength and conditioning coach for it'd be easier to name the number of teams that I didn't work with. And then I went on to the University of Louisville before Hewitt and his team scooped me up to work with TeamBuildr. And now I'm the marketing manager for customers and community with TeamBuildr. In short, that's for fancy terminology for I just talk to coaches all day, which is really, really cool. And absolutely one of my favorite parts of the job is just interacting with the industry, talking to coaches and learning their stories.
Yeah. And I think you've got quite a good perspective on it as well, because you have been a strength and conditioning coach at two really big universities. And then you're now overseeing how we as strength coaches, it's no secret that there's budget limitations, that there's all these different factors that, we could make our program so much better, but we don't have that resource. So you're actually able to see one from a first-hand perspective. Like Yale is an Ivy League school, so your athletes don't necessarily, they might be in scholarship, but they're not getting student athlete privileges, we can say. So then going into a team builder role where you're overseeing thousands of schools and thousands of coaches, and then how that can impact budgets and whatnot as well. So I'm actually really excited for this.
Me too. Let's get into it.
So in your opinion, what is the strong act and what is it trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so it's less of an opinion.
More of a fact. Yeah,
Of course. So the strong act, in short, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm aggressively American. So I know your audience. I know your audience isn't kind of privy to some of the knowledge that I have in terms to the way our government works, things like that, or the way it's supposed to work. But we won't get into that today. And so you'll have to stop me if you need me to kind of slow down and explain some things. But the Strong Act, in short, is a way for the federal government to legitimize the strength and conditioning coach role. That is a very, very abridged version of what the Strong Act proposes. In the United States, we have the Office of Management and Budget, and an SOC code is just a standard occupational classification. So strength and conditioning would have their own dedicated, basically, job line and job title at the federal level. And what that does is it helps gather information on workforce needs, wage data. It gets the 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile of what people are paid. And it's really just a way to further define the scope of the work that we do. Currently, strength and conditioning coaches in the United States, we're kind of lumped together with exercise trainers, fitness people. So the same person, and I mentioned this in my blog post, that got me some messages in my DMs, by the way, the same person that's teaching, a Tuesday night spin class, and their biggest weight they see are 3-pound dumbbells, they are under the same classification as someone that's, working a weight room. Yeah, that's the blog article. So they're under the same job classification that those fitness trainers are. Everybody knows that work and that scope of work are very, very different. And the level of certifications, the degree requirements, the experience needed, they're very different job paths. But right now they're the same line item when it comes to the way the federal government classifies that information. So the Strong Act looks to have OMB have a designated SOC code for strength and conditioning coaches. The reason that that's important is, again, it's gathering that wage data. In my opinion, as you've asked for here, what that would do is basically give us leverage and bands to point to when it comes to negotiating for higher wages, all those wonderful things that we're seeking and complaining about when it comes to the industry as a whole. And I think another thing that's super important to note, and you and I have talked about before, I'm always going to come back to that level of legitimization where it's like, wow, the strength and conditioning coach is now a defined role where we have data. And not to say that the data doesn't exist, because people can always point to a number. Hey, every year it seems like people are pointing to the highest paid strength and conditioning coach in the country. There's always some kind of, think piece that comes out about it. But it's a better way to gather that data versus just kind of collectives. They have their own surveys that they put out, which we know that there's bias in those already, because for the NSCA, for example, they're only reaching out to their members and saying, hey, will you take the survey on what your roles are, what your wages are, and so on. But that's only capturing so much of the industry. You have the UK SCA, which, it is overseas. The ASCA has their own certification as well. Even in the United States, we have the NHSSCA, the CSCCA, insert any acronym, right, that is a coaching credential. And I think to cover up a misconception right now, this Strong Act isn't going to say, hey, you need to have this certification, you need to have this master's degree or so on. It doesn't have any kind of accreditation language. It is simply asking the federal government to define what our work is, what our wages are, and so on. So I want to get that out there because that's, I think, a rumor, if you will, or a misconception about the Strong Act is that it's going to define a certain governing body as kind of the reigning all, that people have to get this level of certification to go work a job. That's the very long-winded answer for you.
It's important that I didn't interrupt you there because, again, it's one thing that, it's obviously happening in the US and it's not currently happening here, but there are still some steps that we as international coaches can take. For me, I'm currently trying to set up a meeting with my local MP to try and start a conversation about it. Because we've mentioned this before to each other, but if we're going to complain about something, it's kind of our duty to do something about it. So it's one of those that I didn't want to interrupt, because the more information that we have on it, the precise information as well, may actually help international coaches as well, trying to speak to their government, trying to speak to, a higher authority in the government to legitimize our profession. But before we kind of go on, if you can describe what the SOC code is and how that sort of comes about for not necessarily the American population, but for the more international.
Yeah, so the SOC code, like I mentioned before, it's just the defining, I guess, line for it. It's basically making strength and conditioning a federally recognized role rather than being lumped into exercise trainers, fitness trainers, coaches and scouts, and so on. That's the short version for you.
Yeah. And with the survey, I know exactly what you're talking about because I have been sent some surveys on this, and it's vastly different from top and collegiate coaches where, most of them might be in American football, where pay is slightly better than, say, if you've got Olympic teams and you've got 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 or more teams. Again, the more teams you have, the more workload you have. The more workload you have, the more compensation you should have, but that doesn't necessarily transfer over. So with these surveys, I think as well it'll be interesting to see if can we get away from the NSCA, the CCSCA, the NH,
CCSC, yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Can we get away from these and send a mass survey to strength coaches as opposed to through accreditation bodies to really find out what is going on?
Yeah, for the federal government, because it takes job postings, salaries that, so your salary gets reported to the IRS and so on. It takes actual kind of that solid information there versus sending out a survey. So it's actual verified information when it comes to pay stubs, salaries, things like that, versus being sent a census, if you will, on strength and conditioning coaches, because there's always going to be that level of reporting bias where, people that are super passionate about taking the survey are going to report their super high wages or their super low wages. So I don't think it necessarily truly captures what the wage gaps look like. And that's why I'll go back to that 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile. The more data we know, the more information, and, we'll be able to see the true scope of what the wages across the industry look like.
I kind of want to keep this early on as well, because I think it might be important for the US coaches that listen in as well. But what is currently the sticking point in, getting this passed through, and what can be done to help, push the Strong Act further on?
Yeah, currently I think there's a lack of information about it, a lack of exposure. It's been interesting to see, who's spoken up about it and things like that. And one of the reasons why you've reluctantly got me on a podcast is because I'm so passionate about speaking out about this, getting information out. Anything that pops up on LinkedIn or Instagram about it, I've been trying to comment on and, trying to clear up some of the things that people are nervous about. I also think as an industry, for better or worse, we tend to stay away from anything political. But this is what I would consider a bipartisan bill because everybody wins. Bipartisan meaning that both parties kind of agree to it. It's not, favoring one side or another. And I think at this point, again, if we're tired of wages, if we're tired of not being considered a legitimate industry and all the wonderful things that, people kind of gripe about, rightfully so, this is a chance to to change that. So for US based coaches, I actually wrote a blog piece about this where you can call your district representative, the Capitol or the Capitol switchboard. You can email someone where you can basically say, hi, I'd like, you to co-sponsor this bill. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, give kind of your perspective on where you are in the industry and everything, and say this will help us capture better wage data, give us a defined SOC code and so on. So that's for US based coaches. My challenge for international coaches is to text your, coach group chat and say, hey, if you're American, you need to call your representative. Tom as my witness, I've been calling my congressman's office to try to get him to co-sponsor the bill and trying to get meetings with him. And I've been talking to other coaches as well to, encourage spreading of information about this.
Yeah, and where can coaches go and find the right terminology or the right things to say to their representative to make sure that point gets across more accurately and properly?
Yeah, so in the blog post I wrote just basically a script. So if you're not comfortable calling either, you can send an email as well, and I'll send it to you for the show notes as well. And I believe the NSCA also sent out an email about kind of terminology that you can say as well to kind of, again, get your point across.
And I kind of want to talk about the bit of the legitimacy of it. Obviously, there is name differences, so you can go from S&C coach to high performance coach to, insert name here, and that can actually include different titles as well. For example, here you can be a high performance coach, but that could also mean you're a sports scientist. It can mean that you're a nutritionist. It can mean that you've got a whole host of other responsibilities.
Yeah, I think Justin Lima actually talks about this, where we can unite under one name. And I think that, again, is super important for the level of legitimization. I am not sure what this does for people that are hired as sport performance coaches or even, assistant director of high performance or anything like that. And I think that's where the industry needs to come together and say, we're strength and conditioning coaches. This is our job function. This is our SOC code, per the US government and so on. I think it's a perfect opportunity to unite. And we don't agree on a lot of things in the industry. You and I even butt heads about certain things as well. But for the most part, we agree. I think, again, this is a chance for us to rally as an industry and really advocate for ourselves. One thing that you and I have been talking about, and something that Tom and I have been talking about, is being stewards for the next generation of coaches. I want to be clear that this isn't something that's going to change the industry overnight. Your salary is not going to be automatically bumped, to adjust for inflation overnight with, the passing of this bill. But what it does do is in 15 years, we can have the potential to look back on this and say, wow, this was really pivotal for our industry. The same way we kind of look back at, Boyd founded the NSCA. I think a lot of people don't really conceptualize how young our industry is and how much it's growing and the work that we have to do for the next generation. How Boyd is still, on his birthday squatting 400 pounds. That's how young the industry is, right? So we really have the opportunity to be stewards for the next generation and help the next field of coaches that are coming in and the next field of interns. I've gotten a few disgruntled coaches saying that, oh, they need to pay their dues. I walked uphill both ways, going to my first internship. The job is hard enough as it is. You and I both know. I feel like for a lot of coaches that paying your dues should include, living on the poverty line, and sleeping on an air mattress like I did at the Airbnb for my first summer internship and everything. So again, the job is hard enough as it is. And if we really want to grow the industry, and I read a blog article recently about how there's like no old strength and conditioning coaches, or there's less than 4 compared to other industries. It's such a young field in the sense that there's a lot of just young people in it. And the way that you grow an industry and help athletes and help, tactical strength and conditioning coaches as well. We speak a lot in the collegiate terms just because that's my background, just as a side note. But to help the field, there has to be longevity in it in terms of career, in terms of experience and exposure and the anecdotes that, we learn from being in a field for 20 years. And the way that you have that is you pay a livable wage, you invest in people. There's a clear path from the next step. My first role, I made $20K as a per diem, so that's no benefits or anything like that. I was still working 80 hours a week because I was needed all the time. I still had my own teams. And congratulations, you did a great job. Here's more athletes to work with. Something that you and I joke about all the time. The way that you invest in people, the way that you grow an industry is moments like this where you have an opportunity to call your congressperson and say like, hey, we need you to co-sponsor this bill, get this passed and so on. So it's not an overnight thing. It's something that's going to take work. But at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for us to level up and do something about the things that we complain about.
100%. I think there's 3 good points about this. One being, like, we're always in the shoulders of giants, and like whether it's Boyd Epley, whether it's Mike Stone, whether like Louis Simmons, like whether it's one of those legends that has contributed so much to the field that like we're still using. Like, how many coaches do you know that use conjugate system? How many patents does Boyd Epley have on different pieces of equipment? Like, it's one thing that they started the field, and partly of like why I'm so firm in the way that I run my business, I run the podcast, I run all these things, is I saw a post from Bartholomew, who did Conscious Coaching, is one of my favorite books in the industry. And I know it's more psychological tailored, but it is for the field. And
it all plays together. We know this. Yeah, it all plays together. Yeah.
But so he made a post saying that he got asked the question 10 years ago, or probably 12 years ago now, on where he saw the field, and his reply was, well, if nothing changes in the exact same place, like we're 12 years on and it's in the exact same place, like we're still undercutting each other, we're still like having these host of things to make sure that we have the job, that we're kind of like gatekeeping, and there's a whole host of things that happens from it. But it's that thing where like I also know that I'm not going to probably benefit from some of the stuff that I'm doing, but if it makes sure that you perhaps do one unpaid internship and then go into a paid role as opposed to 4 or 5 unpaid internships and then go into a role, or like, GA ships, get a bit more money. Like, because it's bad enough being a student, but now like you're doing a master, you're, running so many athletes, so many teams that like you're barely scraping by. Like, we kind of need to see that and like, okay, if it wasn't changed for us, what can we do to change it for the next generation? And I think that's a great point that you bring up as well.
Yeah, again, it's not an overnight fix. What I will tell you is in the United States, with an SOC code, we can apply for federal and state level grants as well. So I think of the case of a high school that doesn't necessarily have the funding for another strength and conditioning coach. A director of that department can, apply for a grant with this SOC code. Those type of things aren't necessarily even on the table for us because we don't have that level of recognized legitimacy. And we know we're legit. We take ourselves seriously. And we're constantly fighting for others to see our value. This is another opportunity to do that where, again, level of legitimization. I can't count. I need like a ticker of like how many times I say that on this podcast. But it's so important to be recognized on that level for, again, the data collection, applying for grants, applying for more resources as a skilled occupation versus, again, being lumped in with a bunch of other miscellaneous occupations.
Now, I kind of want to touch on this as well. And with the funding and the grants and everything that can be involved with it, we're essentially trying to explain that with the Strong Act passing, like you might not have to just do everything yourself. Like you're saying, like you can try and get the funding for another coach, for more equipment to be added into your weight room.
I'm not sure how it works with equipment and like miscellaneous needs. I'm not sure if it's just personnel. So I want to be clear on that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so that's where I'm kind of wondering, because again, if funding is available and we're always complaining about funding, what are the discretions essentially towards that funding?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. That I think is something that would need to be defined a little bit more. But the way it works is there are occupational grants. So if you're a skilled worker, you can apply for this different level of funding. So if you're an intern or a GA or something like that, and you say, hey, I'm going into this field, I'd like to, apply, or even as a director, I'd like to apply for, this occupational grant. That's something that's on the table for us, but not currently because we don't have the SOC code. So I know that's a roundabout way to not answer your question, but I don't want to speak on something that I don't have enough information about.
Well, I think that's also a great way to start digging into this more. And it's like, okay, if we have these things in place, like we can define more and we can tailor it more to what we actually need. I think that, again, that's essentially what the Strong Act is trying to do, is put us in a place where we can breathe a little bit more, essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And something too that I want to mention, I've talked about this as a, bipartisan bill. This isn't asking for taxpayer money. So people that are uncomfortable being political, they're uncomfortable calling representative as something they've never done before, because it is kind of weird, to call up a stranger and say, like, I'm asking for your support. I know that's something that people aren't necessarily familiar with. It's such low-hanging fruit when it comes to this first ask for a congressperson, because it's not asking for money. It's not asking for taxpayer support or anything like that. It's just defining us completely. I wouldn't even say redefining us. It's defining a job function that is so essential to the tactical community, the first responder community, athletics, and the general population as well. So that's definitely something that I want to stress.
Yeah, and I think as well, I kind of want to ask, like, from the posts, from everything that you've sort of put out so far, what are some of the feedback or the pushback you're getting as well?
The pushback that we addressed before has been primarily on, well, am I going to have a certain certification? I think that is partly because this is something that's been backed by the NSCA. Not that it doesn't exist, but I'm not aware of the CSCCA or the NHSSCA putting anything about that. It might exist, but I'm certified through the NSCA, so it's something that I recognize and I see a lot of. But I think it's because it's backed by some of these large ways of getting accredited as a strength and conditioning coach that people have a misconception that, well, I'm going to have to go get my CSCS in order to be a strength and conditioning coach. That's not what this bill does at all. There's no kind of favoring of one governing body. But I definitely call upon, strength and conditioning coaches that are accredited through or certified through these other governing bodies to speak up about it and say, nope, this is, this is not the case. And I also think it's that lack of awareness and lack of information. I was talking to a coach before. They said, hey, I was talking to this director at, this school, and they had no idea what this is, which again, I think that's part of the issue is, coaches aren't aware that this even exists right now, which is me getting in front of a camera trying to talk about it.
And we all know that's your favorite thing to do. So
yeah, absolutely. I prefer to be like behind the camera, telling other people what to do versus like in front of it myself.
I kind of want to, because you've kind of touched on it. Well, specifically to me, I don't think you've mentioned it just now, but I think because the industry is so spread among a lot of different factors, whether it's equipment, whether it's methods and philosophies, or like there's so much that we can agree and disagree on. The one thing that we kind of spoke about was, companies getting behind this. And I know TeamBuildr have been a strong in putting this forward, and more companies that are involved with strength and conditioning should be getting involved more because of the over umbrella thing that they have with the industry. Like they can reach so many other coaches. So how have and I'm aware that you might and I might be a bit biased towards TeamBuildr on this, but
me? No,
why
never.
has it been such an important thing for you and TeamBuildr to also get involved in this act?
I think for TeamBuildr, and this is me speaking as their kind of spokesperson on this, I guess, our job is first and foremost to serve coaches, whether that's through software, whether it's being, loud and noisy through their marketing manager about speaking up like topics like this. But our mission, and it always has been for over a decade now, is to serve strength and conditioning coaches. That's why TeamBuildr is behind this. And for myself, I'm a coach, right? I might wear the marketing hat now, but at the end of the day, my love is to train athletes. It's to serve other people. My house is a family of strength and conditioning coaches. So I think that never leaves you, no matter what your job title is that love and that passion to help others. It's a servant leadership role. And I think that's what's so heartbreaking sometimes about this industry is we love our job so much. We love the work that we do that it's easy to be taken advantage of when it comes to compensation, when it's come to, the way that we're treated, because there's so much love and TLC that we put into our athletes and to the people that we work with, where we're willing to accept a status quo. We're willing to accept lower wages and not necessarily be paid what we're worth in a sense. Again, that's so heartbreaking. And this is something that the Strong Act has an opportunity to address is the level of legitimization. I'm getting tired of saying that word, but I can't stress it enough. It's that appropriate collection of data. It's defining the scope of work that we do. And that's what's important to me is being a steward of the next generation of coaches, because, I've been in positions where I go and I work with these super elite athletes and I put everything out there, whether it's on the field or on the weight room floor. And then I have to choose between like dinner and paying rent that night. And I don't think that's a challenge that coaches should have to face. Like I said before, the job is hard enough as it is. We already kind of give our blood, sweat, and tears to our athletes. So why would we have to choose, staying in a role that we're not going to be paid our worth, or, kind of, again, not moving forward in life because we're not being appropriately compensated for what we're putting out there in terms of our occupation.
I mean, I've definitely heard it, and I mean, you probably will have too, but like there is a substantial amount of coaches each year that leave for that factor. Like there's just no money. So like whether it's paying rent or, doing something you love, like you kind of need a roof over your head. So like there is a lot of coaches that unfortunately leave because of that factor of like, I do so much work and I don't get compensated for it. I also think that And again, this drives me insane. And it's something that if I have a personal connection to that coach, I tell them to remove it immediately. But it's the use of personal trainer in our bios, like
Mhm.
or allowing people to call us just a PT or a personal trainer. And I've this past year I've grown a little bit tired of being called a personal trainer. So
Not that there's anything wrong with being a personal trainer. That's what I did as my side hustle. But to your point, they're very different job functions. There's overlap, but they're different occupations. I get it. That's, try to sit down with my grandpa and explaining what I do is, like pulling teeth, and I give up and I just say, yeah, I train people, like, because they don't quite conceptualize. I don't even quite conceptualize sometimes the work that we do and kind of the scope of things that we're involved with when it comes to performance. But I totally hear you, where they're very different bodies of work that should be defined.
Yeah, and again, I might have to have a counter too, but the legitimizing the field is what's important here. Where do you see this kind of progressing the more that people talk about it?
Yeah, so currently, there's one co-sponsor to this bill. And for people that don't know, a bill gets proposed to a committee and to legislature, and then it needs co-sponsors for basically people to say, yep, this is worth talking about, this is worth being voted on. So currently the bill has one co-sponsor, I believe, out of North Carolina. What it needs is more co-sponsors for it to, it's already in committee, but for people to say, yep, let's edit this, let's get this passed, let's vote on this, and so on. So what it needs is volume, not merit. I talk about this in my blog post, where bills don't die from a lack of merit, they die from lack of volume and lack of people talking about it. So my challenge to any coach listening, if you're based out of the United States, is to call a representative, go to that blog link, email, call, whatever you might have to do. I don't think they accept carrier pigeons right now. But that's my challenge. Yeah, that's my challenge to US based coaches, is to call your representative and get volume around this. If you're an international based strength and conditioning coach, text your group chat that I know you're in. Post about it on your own social media. It can't just be, something that we talk about for 1 week and then we forget about the next. It needs traction, it needs volume, and so on. So that's the point of me being here today, is not to necessarily be the poster child for the Strong Act, but to, be someone that continues to advocate for it.
How many co-sponsors is ideal to start getting this passed through?
I'm not entirely sure what's ideal. I know that it's very good to have both Democrats and Republicans as co-sponsors for the bill to signal that bipartisan support, but I'm not entirely sure what the number is needed to get it passed.
Okay, because again, me being European based, I have no idea how to.
I know, I'm so aggressively American. You and I talk about it all the time. So
I think one of my early questions is what's the difference between the federal and the state laws and how that all plays out?
Yeah, so federal level, overarching, if you're considered a United States citizen, federal covers everything. And then each state has their own kind of their laws, regulations, things like that don't necessarily supersede the federal government, but they're, I guess, an addendum to. So when we talk about different money that's available, federal would be this is a United States level grant versus, living in Pennsylvania, there's Pennsylvania level grants that I'm eligible for, things like that.
So
I'm really calling on a lot of civics knowledge from high school with this and from research that I've done. So, Mrs. M, I really hope you're proud of me for the knowledge that I retained in your class.
So with the federal level acceptance of this, would each state then make their own deliberation on it, or how would that sort of play out?
So federal level, it would cover all states. So it wouldn't necessarily be up to, to have a federal level, I guess there's only federal level, but to have an SOC code through the OMB and Bureau of Labor Statistics, this would cover all of the United States. The state wouldn't decide its own kind of code, if that makes sense, if that's what you're asking.
Essentially, then you could have federal, state grants and funding, and then the states would have a further grants.
Yeah, they have other opportunities available for funding and things like that. Yep.
Yeah. So that would help a lot.
Yeah, I would hope so.
But any coach that's currently watching this, I would really urge you to if you're in the US especially, start making some noise on this, because something that Rachel kind of made me aware of, and as much as I hate to agree with it, one thing's
For better or worse, you guys follow what we do.
I know.
I'm not saying it should be that way, but that tends to be the trend.
Yeah. No, that is true.
I'm gonna get canceled by some like UK-based coach now.
They can get stuffed. No, but it is true, unfortunately. Like, not unfortunately, because this is a good thing, but like as soon as the US start passing legislations and laws and whatnot, we do take a better look at things. And with all the whatever party you stand on, there's been things on both sides that you can agree on or you can disagree on, but they do tend to make it across the pond. And I think if one positive thing that can come out of those differences is the Strong Act, I think that would be a great start. And again, I've started making plans on how I can do my part across here. So I urge coaches in the US and wherever country you're in to see how you can start making these changes as well.
Yeah, and I think the wage benchmarks and the data on that is where it's super important for international coaches as well, because if the wage benchmarks say one thing in the United States, they want comparable numbers for positions in other countries. So I think the data collection in general is the key and very important piece here, that that information is going to be captured. And then I won't speak on it too much, just you and I had talked before about visa status as well. I'm very interested to see how having an SOC code for a defined strength and conditioning SOC code will affect visa status for both people applying for internships, foreign nationals applying for jobs in the United States and so on. So I want to throw that nugget in there. I don't want to speak on something that I don't have a lot of knowledge on because I've never had to apply for a visa, but I'm very interested.
So yeah, I think again, we're both not 100% clued up on this. So this is from my experience of going across there. When I did go across there, like I mentioned before, we had to say that we were volunteers for an internship. We're obviously, I paid to go across there. I didn't make any money. So that is technically true. But I think it's the ability to then get a job across there, because I think that's the hardest one. And, when we're talking about moving to the Australias, moving to the UKs, it all runs on a point system. So with SOC codes, and specifically, like if I know a little bit more about the Australia-based things, like architects, engineers, doctors, and across here is now the same thing because of Brexit. If you do have those SOC codes, like you are scored higher on the point system, which means your visas are accepted easier because you're a sought after field. So if we're a sought after field, that does mean that the collaboration between Europeans and Australians, Chinas, the Asias, like the Americas, like it does mean that we can sort of work a bit closer together. And again, this is from my own research, but even if, we're coming across for speaking engagements, that's also different. Like in theory,
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so in theory, because we're working, we need to declare it, but we don't.
Understood. Okay.
Because like it's kind of like if I declare that I'm working there, then I have to pay taxes. And then again, I'm not against taxes, but we're already getting paid buttons. So if buttons are getting taxed, then it's kind of like again devaluing our industry further.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about that level. I won't speak on that just because I don't have enough information. But yeah, I didn't know that about speaking engagements and things like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, especially like when we're talking about the UK, like the UK loves a little tax code. Like
yeah, really?
And then again, it also depends on like how much you're getting paid. But yeah, it's usually what defers people from doing these kind of things, because it's like it's a great opportunity and you're advancing your career, but that tax does weigh heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very interested to see kind of even for the workforce needs, because this is something that this is data that's also gathered with an SOC code. It shows, this is what you mentioned, a very sought after industry. This is the number of strength and conditioning coaches in the country, jobs available, the turnover rate, I guess. I actually don't know if turnover rate is, that'd be interesting to see. You can
that is high though.
But, I'll be very interested to see just how the data that's collected on it. There's things that we kind of know just by being in the industry, but I'd love to see the actual numbers behind some of these different things that we, guess on.
And I think as well, like, again, as much as I hate to give America props, I don't actually. I do like America. I just like hating on you guys. But like, you are the apex of sport, and there is a clear reason why. Like, as much as it's not legitimized, but like, sport is its own beast in the U.S. So
Oh,
if
absolutely.
we
Especially with NIL. That's crazy. There's 22-year-olds that I work with that are making more money than me. And they're still in college. I'm not saying that NIL is a bad thing, but I think for strength and conditioning coaches, not to get on another tangent here, between the data that we gather and the financial numbers that we gather on performance as it comes to like NIL and things like that, we actually have numbers now that we can attribute to performance improvements. Think of the force plate data that we gather. Are your athletes getting more powerful? Are they getting, more contracts, more money from these organizations or from revenue? Now more than ever, we can really put solid numbers on our worth. We have the opportunity with the Strong Act to gather information about it, all the performance data and the metrics that are our fingertips now that weren't necessarily there in the past. We can assign line items to, every mile per hour added on a pitch, goes to X amount of dollars on a contract. Same thing for quarterbacks, all these huge revenue generating sports. If there's money on the line, we can track things like that aren't necessarily like skill related, which is crazy to think about. Never at the point have we been able to do that.
Yeah, it's something that I know Tom talks a lot about, and
you should hear our dinner table conversations. By the way, we've got like Tommy, screaming in the background for more zucchini or anything like that, and then like him and I are like going back and forth because believe it or not, he and I like disagree on some of like these points and everything too. So yeah, I definitely know that he talks about it.
But like something that he talks about a lot is we're looking at extending contracts, and we're looking at how can we get these players paid more through their metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And again, their metrics improve partly because of us. Yes, they're freak athletes, and a lot
right.
is
And
on
there's skills coaches, there's pitching coaches, there's QB coaches and everything like that. Yeah, that's not to negate any of the work that they do, but like absolutely, like if we want guys to get paid, they have to be available to play. And I think that comes down to our body of work. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going on to, is like, that also applies to us. If we're putting on these metrics for them and we're helping aid these metrics, we also need to look after ourselves and like our availability to that. And again, our availability depends on, can we keep the lights on? Can we keep the gym running? Can we keep like everything flowing?
We talk about this all the time. And I think you and I have talked about it before is, we think about stress levels of athletes. They need to be in a state of mind where they can perform. It's the same thing for us. If I'm working with a super high level athlete, I don't want to be worried whether I can, pay my electric bill and so on. So exactly, I never really thought about that parallel of our availability, but you're 100% right. And I think it comes down to our development too. I think it's funny, when coaches get down on, athletes sitting the transfer portal looking for the next opportunity. Well, there's so many coaches out there that, whether it's salary, culture, trying to, work with a different sport or so on. We hop schools too, especially at the collegiate level. Again, not that there's anything wrong with it, because I think each coach's, situation is different, but, you can't talk about an athlete, oh, they're not going to develop because they keep, going to, a different school every single year. They, they're hitting the portal and so on. I think it's the same level for coaches, where are you developing yourself? Have you worked with a class of athletes from their freshman year to their senior year and have been able to kind of track that trend of athlete development in your system? So my hope is with something like the Strong Act and better investment in coaches and strength and conditioning resources is that, we're able to really prove ourselves. Not that we need to be proved, but we're really even more able to kind of put that data forward of what we're able to do for athletes.
Yeah, I think this is something that is probably a lot harder to put in place, but it's something I've started talking about and looking into. And again, you can disagree or not. That's fine. But it's
We're
like,
so careful with like not missing,
yeah,
with not saying the wrong thing right now. This is hilarious.
I think we're trying to
I've gotten
behave.
too many angry DMs. I'm like scarred.
So one piece of advice on that: don't read those.
Just
Ignore
block.
them. Delete
Just block.
them.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to engage with coaches because I don't want anybody just posting like, misinformation about that. So
There's a loose
Yeah.
translation on a phrase in Portugal, and it kind of translates to "everyone's got an asshole." Doesn't necessarily mean that it works properly. So that's people's opinions. But I think when we're talking about our industry and we look at stuff like ATs or dietitians, physiotherapists, they actually do something that not only legitimizes them further, but it also gives them a breadth of knowledge on the chosen field. And it's, they'll have a placement where it's like general population. They have a placement where it's like in a hospital. They have a placement where it's like collegiate, combat, like more military based. So like, I think something like that might also be quite beneficial to look at further down the line when we're, legitimizing our name a little bit further. Again, this is way off into the distance, but it might be something that
right.
looking into a little bit carefully might be able to help legitimize this field as a whole.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different schools of thought because there's healthcare models for strength and conditioning. Many hospitals now have some kind of like performance institute or something similar, so I think there's different schools of thought. There's like hospital model where we're considered healthcare workers almost on some level. I'm not sure what that does for the industry because I don't want to say there's like restrictions with a healthcare model, but I know from the structure that I've seen at these places that it kind of handicaps coaches a little bit. So I'm not sure how that kind of like designation will work, but I get your kind of train of thought with that.
Yeah. I mean, it is something I'm growing wary of trying to explain the differences. So I'm trying to look at different industries and how they've sort of sell their system. If you're an RD nutritionist, that's a fucking nutritionist. That's legit.
There's dietitian, there's nutritionist. Yeah, there's almost like these different levels to define these things.
So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. Before I get everything wrapped up, I do want to urge coaches, if you're in the US, go speak to your representative. Make sure that, blow their lines up. Just absolutely bombard them. I know that Rachel is doing this, and I know some other coaches are aiming to do this. So please reach out to your representative. If you're in Europe or UK, I know that you can reach out to your MPs and just making them aware that this stuff is happening in the US. They might actually just be like, okay, like what's going on there and how can I get in front of this? Because like everyone loves their name out there on something that is new and something that's happening somewhere else. So again, reach out to your representatives, your MPs, anyone that, is able to make and carry your word to a higher level. Rachel, if you want to, again, point people in directions where they can have these transcripts, have these pathways where they can know exactly what to say to them. We will also gather all this information and put it down in the description. So make sure you check that out and really take time to look at how you can push this further on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say for any coach that has any other questions, I can do my best to help. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Instagram, I'll send those handles to you, then Manny as well. And if you have any other thoughts about this, my whole job and my whole livelihood is talking to coaches and, getting in touch with the industry and the different schools of thought on the state of the industry. So if you have any of those, please don't hesitate to reach out.
So before I get you off, I will point people towards your handles. So that is Rachel's Instagram.
Yep.
And this is Rachel's LinkedIn. Please do message her. She is someone that I have personally had a lot of contact time with, and not only is she a great human as a whole, but she does also have a breadth of knowledge on the industry. So reach out and, make your your questions heard by her, because she is able to then advise you in the best way possible.
Yeah. And we got to get over to Scotland to visit you guys. We talked about it before, but I was deeply pregnant at the time, and then I had a newborn, and now I have a feral 9-month-old. So we'll have to bring him over. I know you're putting together some different events and things like that. So we're excited to come see you.
Perfect. I appreciate you so much, Rachel.